our book review feature this morning, we unpack Bulelwa Mabasa's new memoir titled My Land Obsession. Describing this book as an ode to her ancestors, Bulelwa opens us to her more than 2 decades worth of experience, challenges and lessons learned as a practicing lawyer. Well, the land reform, restitution and tenure aficionado also shares her personal story from her upbringing, her grandparents' first-hand lived experiences of land dispossession, and her interest in land justice and ownership, amongst many others. Now to tell us more about this fresh off the shelves, memoir, Bulelwa is in studio. Good morning. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
I'm great, thank you. I mean, the first thing that struck me before we get into the details of the book is the cover of the book. And for most of us that grew up Gomidolands, and it turns out you actually grew up Gomidolands too, is that we grew up in these 4-room houses, right? Absolutely. And that's the cover of your book. Tell us a little bit about that. I'm so interested in that.
Yeah, so when the design team and I were discussing the cover of the book, usually books about land will have a landscape or maybe someone's face, and I had a strong feeling that it had to be this 4-roomed house, right. 511K, the address, my grandparents' home. Yeah. Because that's the home where I felt like who I am, my personality was cooked there. And that's the home that, as much as it was a small home, it was rich with memory, rich with love and affirmation and belonging and heritage. And I felt if I had to name or describe one thing, or one place where I felt my entire existence was shaped, it would be this home. So I think the design team did a wonderful job at capturing it the way that it is. Yeah. And it also shows, the beauty and the joy that came out of these 4-roomed houses that were supposed to be fortresses of apartheid, were supposed to be forgotten, were supposed to be excluded in these homes. But I think the ability of our parents and grandparents to rise above that and to kind of, feel inspired happened in these homes. Yeah.
Let's talk about the book, My Land Obsession. Talk to us about your obsession with land and where did it all start?
So the obsession with land for me, I feel like the Group Areas Act, as we all know about it, was an act that was enacted in 1957 or, around about there. And that act was the act that separated South African societies. It separated us in terms of geography, where we could live and so forth. And obviously that act was responsible, firstly, for my grandparents being uprooted from Sophia Town into Meadowlands. Yes. And as you know, Meadowlands was one of the first townships that came out of the Group Areas Act. So when I got born in this household, I was born by grandparents who were always lamenting the day that the Caspers came. And the police brutally removed them from where they were. And so as a child, I was always curious about what would their lives have turned out to be, if they didn't have that kind of violence response and the trauma response. And so it always just made me very, very, I was always very curious. And then, of course, when I went to my maternal side of the family in Marapiane, in a village where my mother grew up, then I realized how the migrant labor system meant that my mother did not have her father every day. She could only see her father during Christmas times. Okay. And that was also part and parcel of the spatial issues of what apartheid did, was that it separated us in terms of not only space, but it also separated us in terms of rural and urban kind of living. So all of these things put together. Yeah. And then, of course, there was this painting, actually, that was at home in Meadowlands that was haunting. You probably had it at your own home as well. It's inscribed Verna. It's the girl with the teardrop. Yes. I think I actually have it somewhere here. Yes. It's a girl with the teardrop, and that painting...
every household
has this. Yes. And I asked my father, to say, why is this girl, why are her clothes tattered? Why is she crying? And my father's answer was prophetic, He said to me, well, she's a generation of landless people. And so then I was curious about, so in South Africa, the land is so important. You can either be removed from it because of the Group Areas Act,
Yes.
and you can live in a township because that's where, you know, the apartheid forces meant you lived, and that meant you don't have access to clean air. You know, there was coal-fired stoves. It meant that you don't hear birds, you don't hear water features because of the smoke and because of the coal-fired stoves. Also because it's surrounded by mine dumps.
Yeah.
So your whole experience and your own relationship with land is framed by this huge dispossession that happens generation to generation.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's how I then thought land was so important. And of course, I saw it in the literature that my father exposed me to. You know, I was reading Achebe, I was reading Mongani Sirote, and all of those authors in African literature. And land was always such a central theme. The idea of dispossession. But I think it was also important to me because the idea of dispossession for Black people was not just about being dispossessed of the brick and mortar or the space. It's being dispossessed of your voice, of your heritage, of your cultural inclinations and reality. And so that's what actually then also caused me to become a lawyer, because I felt through law, hopefully, I felt there could be a voice for me to kind of put this land question in a humanized and in a personal way where we can all relate to it.
Yeah.
Because I think right now, the way that our country has dealt with it is that we talk about it when parliament happens, when there's parliamentary comments, when there's expropriation without compensation, and when you know, politicians talk about it before elections. So in this book, I was trying to kind of awaken us as a nation to own our stories.
Yeah.
Own our stories, and whether that's a four-roomed house, or whether that's your plots in the rural areas, or whether you are that farmer who has, you know, generations of Black farm workers in your home and that share that space. It's basically to awaken all of us to say, the land question is not going to be resolved magically by other people. And that's where I write my story.
Now, in the book, you also speak about law and policies when it comes to land. I mean, briefly tell us a little bit about that.
So when I started my practice at Worksman's Attorneys, I joined in 2002. And then when I became a partner in 2008, I thought to myself, I looked around and I said, you know, there isn't a commercial law firm that focuses specifically on land reform as a practice area. I started this practice area and it grew. You know, I started dealing with land claims, restitution claims, people who were bemoaning the fact that they were given land but they don't have lease agreements from government and so forth. So I developed this practice area, which, you know, is now quite a big team. And I then got noticed, obviously, because of the work that I do. I also did a lot of writing in the publication space. I did a lot of articles, and that really got me to then get the attention of President Ramaphosa in 2018. And the little opportunity that I had to speak to him was to say, this land question really requires a focused approach. I'm making myself available to become part and parcel of the solutions that can come out from land policies. And then that meant that I became a member of the Presidential Advisory Panel on Land Reform, which was a 10-member panel. And some of the recommendations that we have made on that panel have then made it onto the national sphere. You know, I can give you examples around a policy on land donations. We made recommendations around when expropriation without compensation could happen and so forth, and many others. So really, it's how I was able to land my voice, even on a national sphere, on something that I felt I was born into. Yeah. You know, I was born into this land dispossession, land disparity, and I made a career out of it. But more than that, I think this is how I serve my country.
All right. Bulelwa, thank you so much for talking to us. It looks like just time flew, but thank you so much for talking to us. Bulelwa Mabasa, her book, beautiful, My Land Obsession, a memoir, and she was our book feature for today.